everybody. Welcome back to a brand new episode once again of Leveling Up with JC with the Shot. Happy Friday. Happy for you all to be back, and I'm happy to be joined today with one of my favorite people once again. We were going to have multiple people on this week, but life happens for some people, and so it is going to be myself and Shifty Powers this week, and I'm excited for this episode because the focal point of this episode is surrounding a lot of what's happening in the Twitterverse and streaming and gaming, and more specifically just focused around cancel culture. And so I want to have a conversation about this because it is extremely prevalent right now, and we're seeing a lot of it happening, especially in the state that our society is in. And so let's get Robbie in here once again. Welcome, my friend.
Hello.
How's it going?
It's going. It's going. I just started a new job about a week ago, so
Love that.
Yeah, lots of learning, and I relocated, so obviously there's some change involved with that. So I've just been, pushing through every day.
Love to hear that. I mean, sometimes it's all we can do, especially
Yeah.
in the state of everything.
Yes, you are not wrong, my friend.
So you and I have kind of talked about cancel culture a little bit, and but I don't think we've gone into as much depth as we probably could have. And I know that we've had some text exchanges, but I don't know that we've ever necessarily talked about it like in person. I mean, not that this is technically in person, but you know what you and I mean. So
Yeah.
with cancel culture, right? Like, what is your perception in general of what cancel culture is?
Yeah. I think I'm still learning about what my perception is of it. So the way that I have understood it, what this cancel culture is basically, if one person or group of people say or do something that we don't agree with or that we find to be problematic, we decide that they are quote unquote canceled. And that I think means not following them anymore,
Mm.
whether that be like actually following them on social media or following what they're saying, like not subscribing to what they're saying is true about
Mm-hmm.
the world. Um, or I guess it would be also like deciding to refute
Mm.
those people publicly. And I think that that's a piece of it that um, that is like seen on social media a lot, right? We see someone that we're like, this person doesn't have the same views as me or has said something problematic. Maybe it's something racist or sexist or what have you. So we're going to cancel them
Mm-hmm.
and not take anything that they say seriously. And I think my perception is fragmented,
Mm.
honestly, because and you know this about me, but I try to approach every person and every organization with a sense of nuance,
Mm.
right? I myself have grown, in the 29 years that I've been alive, and what I
Mm-hmm.
believed a year ago, what I believed 5 years ago, isn't the same as what I believe now. Um, and that's about everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's about, gaming, it's about higher education, it's about development of humans, um, and what I believe to be true. And so, 5 years ago, I would have been canceled probably by some people. I mean, that's just the reality of it. So on one hand, I'm like, I need to give grace to people and know that we are capable. I have to believe that humans are capable of changing
Mm-hmm.
their views because it's been my experience. On the other hand, I have to recognize that if I have views that I'm not willing to be challenged on, or that I'm not willing to engage in conversation with, I just want to say my piece and try to get people to believe what I believe. And it ends up harming people,
Mm.
that if I'm canceled for that, maybe it's warranted.
Mm.
Right. And so I think I mentioned to you that for me, it's like if you, because once you know something, you can't unknow it. I mean, you can
Right.
ignore it, but you can't like pull it out of your brain,
Mm-hmm.
right? Unless there's something that is stopping you from knowing.
Mm.
Um, so I try to be like, once you know, you can't unknow, so I have to do better if I know better. And if there are people that know better, but they're still doing the same stuff, like they're not willing to change, then I mean, I feel like canceling them is a form of accountability.
Okay.
Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I appreciate the if you know that you can't unknow, but you know that you can do better. Like I love that a lot. And I think a lot of what we're seeing, I think especially in higher education, and obviously like this podcast isn't focused on higher education. We do bring that because that's where we both live and work and have been for some time. But there's this whole thing about unlearning, right? And the focal point of unlearning, and that's not uncommon, I think, outside of our realm, but I think that's where a big focal point is of that. And I think especially where society is currently, like I'm seeing a lot of people talking about unlearning, ways that they've been taught or things that they've been taught, right? Like we've talked about history books, and we've talked about how there are things that are being intentionally left out of these books, yes. Right? And history is scuffed to begin with. That could be a whole nother podcast. I'm not going to get into that realm because the focal point is on gaming and cancel culture. But
yes,
I think that and kind of what you said is knowing that we can do better, but we have to put in that work to get to that point, right? And I think I'm in a similar boat as you, as like I feel like I have mixed views and opinions on cancel culture. And you and I have talked about this because, on one end, both of us come from a growth mindset and believe that if somebody is challenged, they have the opportunity to grow and redeem themselves to an extent. And I think you just mentioned that, right? And I think back to when you and I first met, very different person.
Yes.
Right? Like I have grown a lot, and you've grown a lot too, and we've been able to be a part of each other's journey in that. And I also agree, like there are things that I probably did 5 years ago that in today's climate I would be canceled for. And I think that's a testament to how quickly society and societal norms evolve and change, right? Because I think that especially now, like we are seeing so many more things that we're bringing to the forefront that people are I don't want to say finally standing up to, but things that we have put off for so long, and it's got to this point of like, all right, we need to talk about this. Like we are as a country, and I think as a world, in a very emotional place in this current climate for a variety of reasons, right? And we've talked about some of those things. But I think for me, like I said, like I have mixed viewpoints with cancel culture. Like I think that there are individuals that have continually and repeatedly done or have said the same things over and over, and people have challenged them, they've apologized, but they continue to do it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And for me, like I think it gets to a point where they quote unquote need to be canceled. And I think I told you, like, in my opinion, like cancel culture is so toxic. And I think that especially on the internet and in gaming and in the streaming realm, people are so quick to write somebody off. And that's the frustrating part, because you don't give people a chance to learn from their mistakes and grow. And so I guess my question for you on that is like, for you, at what point, and you kind of touched on this, but at what point is somebody canceled for you?
Yeah, so I have a couple of things to say. Actually, I think the first thing is I don't think I know anybody that's actually been canceled, like truly canceled, meaning nobody's following them. We are disassociating from them. We're ignoring them. I mean, even some of the most powerful figures who have done bad things still have people that are like defending them
Mm.
and supporting them. So for me, I have to think about, like, we say we cancel them, and maybe some people are, or maybe a whole lot of people are like, no, we're not gonna subscribe to that
Mm-hmm.
person anymore. And I think of like Bill Cosby or Harvey Weinstein, who committed these horrible acts of atrocity,
Mm.
basically trauma to other people, uh, and they're in jail, but people are still defending them.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, have they officially been canceled? I don't know. um, but so I have to think about that. The other thing I have to think about is when I first started hearing about cancel culture, because when I first met you, cancel culture wasn't a thing,
Right.
right? Like, this is typically attributed to Gen Z,
Mm-hmm.
at least how I've understood it. And I have to think about why it was created.
Mm.
Um, a lot of people are quick to, excuse my language, but basically shit on Gen Z
Mm.
because of one reason or another. But they're teased and ridiculed for being too empathetic,
Mm.
as if that's a bad thing, because they're trying to create a better world, a more equitable world. And so they're trying to, right, they're trying to find these people that are saying and doing bad things
Mm-hmm.
and say you're canceled. What you're saying is harming people,
Right.
right? That racist thing that you said is harming people. So
Mm-hmm.
on one hand, I understand that, and I get the sentiment, because I mean, you and I both know some of the people that I'm like, I don't want to say it on the podcast. I don't know if it's okay to say it, but like some of our political leaders,
True.
in my mind, canceled. Like,
Right.
there's
Right.
no coming back, and I think that's rooted in a place of anger and probably a little bit frustration
Mm.
about them. um, but yeah, so to come back to your original question, I have to think about those things
Mm-hmm.
and where it originated and um, uh, how it's happening in real
Mm-hmm.
time. I think for me, it is truly when, um, like, somebody is canceled truly when they are saying and doing things that continue to harm people,
Okay.
even though they know that there is other avenues that they could take that could potentially reduce the harm. And there's really no way of me or you or anybody else saying they do know better. Like, I can't live inside that person's brain.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's based off of action, right? Like, I think of some of the leaders that we have. I'll even bring it back to like leaders in my work, not my current job, but in past jobs, who, you know, we say we're about student development and growth, but we do things and say things that are the opposite of that, even though we know that there are other things we can be doing to help that
Mm.
development. So it's like, what are you doing here? Like, what's the point of doing this work if you're saying you're about student development, but then you're doing things that go directly against and potentially causing harm to students,
Mm.
right? Or to people. So, yeah, I think about that, and I've got a lot more thoughts there. But one thing I will say is, a tool that I've been using is the cycle of socialization. It's not a perfect tool by any means,
Okay.
but I'm co-teaching a class right now with two of my good friends, and one of the first things we talked about was the cycle of socialization. And it's
Mm.
this idea. I'm not going to do it justice, but it's basically this idea that you're born into a world. There's already systems in place. You don't really have guilt or shame yet, because you don't know what's better or what's worse, but you're
Mm-hmm.
socialized. You're taught on a personal level by family, teachers, people you love and trust, how
Mm-hmm.
the world works. That's how you're taught.
Yep.
And then it's reinforced, right, with messages from institutions or the culture that you live in, right? So I think of churches, schools, television, media, and then culture might be like language or like lyrics that you hear in songs, that sort of thing,
Mm-hmm.
that reinforce what you were taught.
Yep.
Then there's a set of like rewards and consequences if you go against that mode of thought,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if you speak out against it, you're ostracized,
Mm-hmm.
right? So good example could be, I was born into the world, and this is true for me. I was born into the world, and we have a ton of racist systems, right? And no matter how much my parents and my teachers tried to teach me that racism is bad, I'm still learning in a system that perpetuates it. So I
Mm-hmm.
have these racist tendencies, and I think we all do. Then it's reinforced by people that I see and hear, and friends and family that might be racist or prejudiced. And then when I try to speak out against it, I fear that potential loss of friendship or
Mm.
family, or you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
this fear of speaking out, and that ends up being self-perpetuating. It continues to go until I decide that the discomfort associated with speaking out is greater than the consequence.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
And what keeps us in that cycle is fear or confusion or insecurity or ignorance. Sometimes we don't even know we're perpetuating a cycle,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I have to think about that when I think about people that are being canceled, because maybe they've been alive for 30 years and everything has told them that what they're saying and doing is true and it's good.
Mm-hmm.
We can talk a lot about churches for that reason.
Yep.
I have lots of thoughts there I'm not going to go into, but maybe you were born and you grew up in a church that basically said it was okay to not like people in the LGBT community,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a good thing, that God said X, Y, or Z, right? So for me to cancel you, although that what you believe is bad, although what you believe is harming people
Mm-hmm.
and causing trauma, me canceling you is writing off, in my opinion, all potential to see the context that you grew up in and see your potential for growth
Mm-hmm.
and being able to change your mind or change maybe your actions or attitudes. I personally believe everybody can change. Maybe that's too naive or romantic or whatever you want to call it, but I
Right.
think as humans we have that capability. I've seen it too often to I've seen that growth too often to not believe in it, and I've seen it in my family.
Mm.
You know, if you ever want to know a good story, ask me about my grandmother, um, and her racist tendencies and attitudes and how she grew
Mm.
based off of things that happened. But yeah, I think that's what that's what I have to think about when I think of what time is it to cancel people.
Mm.
Like who am I to cancel people? One, and how do I know that I'm canceling them? That was a really long way of answering your question, but does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I have a couple thoughts in response to that, because as you were going, like, there are things that you brought up that I was like, yeah, this makes a lot of sense, because I think, to your point, like, I don't think anybody is ever going to be 100% canceled,
Right.
because people are going to have followers, or that individual is going to have values that other people share. And I think that's the big part with cancel culture is it is based off of the values that you hold and the values
Right.
that you live your life by, right? Because if somebody doesn't match your values, you're automatically going to write them off. And that's human genetics. That's what we've been raised in. And I think too, back to the the cycle of socialization and being brought into a system that's already been created, right? Like, I think about this all the time. I don't necessarily attribute it to this cycle, but I feel like that's what it is, because I think of education and I think of public schools more specifically. And as I said earlier, right, like, what is taught currently in schools is limited to what the government wants us to learn. And so that cycle continually repeats. And again, whole nother podcast, not on the topic of gaming. And so I want to steer this in that direction, because I think some of the things that we're seeing now and some of the things that we've talked about, and we've talked about in our friend group, and I'm gonna bring this instance up, and there are streamers that are being canceled over things that they've done on stream in the past, right? And I am going to put names to these individuals because I think it's important to talk about these things. And
yes,
one of the biggest things that you and I have talked about is Alinity as a streamer.
right.
If nobody's aware, she does a variety of different things on Twitch. But in past streams, she has fed vodka to her cats. She has tossed her cat over her shoulder. She's done a variety of different things, and people are very quickly getting to the point of canceling her, right? And we have had, I don't want to say heated discussions in our friend group, but we have had some discussions in our friend group focused on that, right? Like, does she deserve to be canceled, right? Like, I only named 2 instances. I'm sure there are a variety of more things, but she has recently come out and tweeted, and she did a video or on her stream, like, where she was essentially crying because of all the hurtful things like Twitter was saying, people were saying in her chat. So I'm curious from your perspective, right? Like, going back to do you get canceled, right? Like, is this somebody that you would put on your radar to cancel?
I personally would say no. I wouldn't cancel Alinity. I also should mention I have not watched any of her streams.
Okay.
As you know, and maybe I mentioned it in the last time I was on, but the only streamers that I really follow are my friends,
Mm-hmm.
people that I know in real life. I mean, I follow other people, but I don't like go to their streams every day,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like I would with you or Reckless or Bear Claw. So should she be canceled? My initial reaction is no. Did she do bad things that I disagree with? Yes,
Mm-hmm.
100%. I disagree with the tossing of a cat over her shoulder and feeding her her cat's vodka. I mean, yeah, the conversation could very quickly go to, did she know better, and did she do better because she knew better? Like, I have to say that probably she knew better,
Mm-hmm.
right? Probably she knew better than feeding her cat's vodka, and probably she knew better than tossing her cat out of frustration, even if she thought it was going to land on its feet, even
Mm-hmm.
if she knew, I should say. Um, so I'm less focused on canceling her as a person and more focused on should she not receive, but should she face backlash or consequence from her streamers or from her followers
Mm.
or even other streamers because of her actions? I mean, yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's warranted, especially if somebody sees you doing something that's like potentially harmful and
Mm-hmm.
causes trauma for something or someone. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just don't know. And I did watch the video of her talking about I watched a little bit of the video, I should say, of her talking with someone about the Dr. Disrespect
Mm.
backlash that she's received. And I think I remember her saying, I've never even met the guy, I've never talked to the guy, and yet I'm being, you know, held accountable or held
Mm-hmm.
in receipt of him being banned from Twitch. She's like, I've never met the guy, I've never talked to him, so it has nothing to do with me. But I'm going to guess that his followers don't care what she has to say. That
Mm-hmm.
in their mind, at least some of them, she's the reason, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or at least a part of the reason. So I don't know. I mean, that's the thing is, if she came out and apologized, if she came out and said, you know, what I did was wrong, and here are the steps that I'm going to take in the future. If that happens again, like that to me shows growth, even if it's small.
Right.
Because if you're able to recognize that you did something wrong and do it in a genuine and non-performative way,
Mm-hmm.
um, I think that's growth, even if it's just one step.
Yeah, and I agree. I think, and I watched Alinity before all of this happened, and like I agree. Like, did she know better? Probably. Like, I think that there are people, and this is going to lead me to something I want to talk about here in a little bit, but I think there are individuals that will do things because they know it'll get a reaction out of other people.
100%.
Right. And I I think about Keemstar. And if you're unfamiliar with who Keemstar is, he has a YouTube channel that he produces a show called Drama Alert, which focuses on anything internet related, essentially. Um, essentially, if you're familiar with H3H3 Productions, it is a very similar setup, and those two kind of butt heads a lot of the time. So Keemstar recently, within the last couple of weeks, or the last week or so, has essentially posted videos apologizing to comments that he has made about different streamers or gamers coming out about being sexually assaulted. And the way that he has presented, this on Drama Alert or on his Twitter, information that he has received, and in his apology, essentially he never puts the blame on himself for making that mistake. He also has said that those that were sexually assaulted could have just said no. And so I think about cancel culture, and I think about Keemstar, who perpetuates cancel culture through his show, right? And then he comes out with an apology that puts the blame on the other person. So, Robbie, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that whole situation, because there's a lot to unpack there.
There is a lot there. Well, first of all, I don't think it's a genuine apology if you don't take responsibility for the things that you personally said or did. And I think that that's important to distinguish. Like, it's different in me saying, I'm sorry that you responded that way, or I'm sorry that I said something that made you respond that way. That's different than, I'm sorry that I said or did this that caused harm, and here's how I'm going to be better. So that, coupled with, it sounds like there's some, this is a very general statement, but it sounds like there's some fragile masculinity stuff going on there that I could probably spend all day talking about, because men are socialized to not take the blame.
Mm-hmm.
Myself and you included. I mean, we just, that's how we're taught,
Right,
as men, to live in the world, generally speaking. And so, yeah, if for somebody who, like you mentioned, he's somebody who perpetuates cancel culture. For somebody who basically has created a brand and possibly monetized it, has made money, he monetizes it off of canceling people, or perpetuating that culture, to not take ownership and responsibility of the things that you said and have done, and to be, just to put it plainly, to be pretty wrong about some of the stuff you said. Like survivors you can't just say no, and
right,
then people are like, oh, okay, they said no. Like, that's not how any of that works.
right.
And I'm going to assume that people did say no at some point.
Yep.
But people respond to trauma differently. People respond to those situations differently. So maybe their initial response is to freeze, right? Maybe their initial response is to say nothing because they don't know what to say, because they're shocked, right? There's a whole stream of psychology behind that, and there's a whole stream of there's a ton of research on this stuff
Right.
that he could have just easily spent an hour or two reading up on.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So yeah, like those are my general thoughts right now, and I feel like I started a couple of different avenues to go, but I just feel like, so should he be canceled? He as a person, probably not, but he needs to be able to understand what a genuine apology is, and he
Mm-hmm.
needs to know, because it sounds like he does know better based off of what has been described, but he's just not doing better.
Mm.
So should his show, or his is it a show or a podcast?
It's like a show. Yeah, it's basically
Yeah.
a show. Yeah.
Okay. So should his show cease to exist? I mean, if he continues even past that not real apology to perpetuate the harm that's caused to people,
Mm-hmm.
then I think, yeah. But should he be canceled forever without ever having the opportunity to redeem himself, or to learn and do better? I don't think so. I mean, I don't think that's, if I believe that for one person, I have to believe it for most, if not all people.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So, yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, it kind of like leads me into my next kind of question for you, and the next part that I kind of want to talk about is, you know, we look at streaming, right? And like, between myself and Reckless and Bear Claw and the other people that we know that stream, right? Like, by no means are we close to streaming full time, right? And our following and viewership isn't terrible, right? Like, it's not, it's small, but we're growing, right? And so I think of streamers who, are that mid-size to large size, right? Like, that probably are either streaming full time or in the process of getting to that point. Do you think that these individuals that have more eyes on them, and even celebrities, I guess, in general, that have more eyes on them or have a larger following, are subject to be canceled quicker?
By me, or
In general. So, like, if they were to do something on stream or something happens, do you think because they have such a large following or because they have like so many viewers, they are subject to being canceled by individuals faster because of that? Because they're held at a higher light?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. That's how it seems to stand right now. Is, I mean, we've heard, and it continues to happen every day. Feels like there's a celebrity that says or does something, and because of their stature, because of the fame and the amount of people that follow them, in order to mitigate the harm that could be caused, people are like, okay, we need to cancel them. And that's something that I totally understand. That's why this could be a whole nother podcast too. That's why I think it's sometimes we do ourselves an injustice by basically putting people on a pedestal, and having idols, right? Like, I've gone back and forth on this. Some of the people that I look up to, like Mr. Rogers, or Lin-Manuel Miranda, or Bell Hooks, any of these people, if they said or did something that was harmful, a part of me would be like, well, I want to support them because they're human,
Right.
and they made a mistake and whatnot. But then I'm a part of being canceled, right? And also, I'm not taking responsibility, not necessarily responsibility, but I'm not acknowledging that what they said or did was harmful. If I continue to support them, that's through the lens of cancel culture as I know it. So on one hand, yeah, I see that. I think, should they, do they deserve that? That's a question of how you view humanity, and our capacity to change, and our capacity to make mistakes. Because here's the thing, if you're streaming and you say something problematic and you have 10 viewers, it is absolutely different than if you're streaming, you say something the very same thing, and you have 1,000 viewers, because the potential impact of that is much larger. And that is not to say that some of the things that you might say or do with 10 viewers is okay.
Right.
It's not to say that it's okay to do it with less viewers, but you have to recognize the impact that you have, that people will literally hold on to every word that you say. And with streaming, it's no different. I mean, there are kids. There are kids watching this stuff. And I mean, I'm sure you could speak to this a little bit too, but you know, kids are I don't want to say gullible, but they're young, and their minds are sponges. Like, they pick everything up. So you say or do one thing and it's problematic and they start repeating it. That's the thing for me, is like, you know, do I want to cancel that person? No. But should they come out and say, what I said or what I did was wrong? Here are the steps that I'm taking to change that and to make sure it doesn't happen again. Yes, they should do that to mitigate the harm. Yeah, I mean, you know, I don't want to beat around the bush. Like, I've said problematic things when I play games. You do it,
right?
I mean, all of us do it, and I think it takes somebody saying something about it, right? Whether that's on the stream or, you know, in private. I think you're a good testament to that. Like, I've said things to you about, like, hey, what you said wasn't good,
right,
and you should probably not say that, and here's why. Right, and you've changed because of that. So, does that make sense? Like,
yeah. And I
don't
think
know what your thoughts are.
I think too, like, I think about some of my following, and I think about the stream that I had on Wednesday. And you know, part of the stream, we hopped into creative on Fortnite. We filled the lobby. Like, we had 16 people, and it was so much fun. And one of the first times I've ever actually filled a lobby, and like a good amount of those in that lobby are teenagers.
Yep.
Because that's part of my following and part of my community. And then I think of streamers like Nick A30 or Ninja, right, who promote a family-friendly stream, right?
Right.
Where there isn't any swearing. And I guess for me, like, do they do that, like, no swearing, because they don't think it's their place to essentially open up that part of the world for their viewers, right? Like, for me, it's like, okay, so like, what makes you family friendly? That you know, don't swear, talk about inappropriate things. Because I think about kids in school, right, that are gonna hear stuff like swearing, or they hear these things from their peers, right? Like, they're gonna be tossed into the world that brings up these things, right?
Right.
And so the fact back to the sponges, like, for me, sometimes I question that family friendly part, because are we doing, as streamers, and this is where there's a really big gray line here, and I want to preface that, but as streamers, are we doing a disservice by not helping people realize, you know, sometimes what the world actually is, and talking about these things? And I talk about, and have talked about, very heavy topics on my stream. I have, because it's what makes me real and what makes me relatable to people that come into my community, right? I don't at times filter myself, because I want to be my authentic self. And, you know, I don't know Nick A30. he's probably the most prominent person that I can think of when it comes to family streaming. And I don't know if that's who he is in real life, right? Like, I don't know if he filters himself wherever he goes. And, I think about that sponge piece. Like, I have viewers, like I said, in my community, and I've played with viewers, and I'll still swear, right? And sometimes I question, I'm like, okay, should I be doing this? Should I not? And then I think they're probably already hearing this anyway. And I don't know if that's a fair assumption. I don't know if that's me just assuming and basing that off of my experiences of growing up, and it probably is. But I almost feel like for us, if they are spending that time watching us, they're spending that time in our community, like, they're going to see us essentially as role models at some point.
Yes.
Or look up to us. Like, I've had a couple of people reach out to me and have said that, and I appreciate that a lot. But are they saying that because of their ability to relate to me and the fact that I don't filter myself at times, right? Like, so for me, I know this kind of shifts a little bit away from that cancel culture, but I think that's where I get tied up. Is, do we talk about these things as streamers and in these communities? Do we put on a front to be family friendly, especially for younger audiences? And this could probably be a whole nother podcast where we talk about this further, but for me, it's like, how do you make that balance? Because you want to be a role model for these kids. And I think about some of these bigger streamers, right, that, like, people, as going back to what you said, idolize some of these people.
Yes.
And I think if one wrong thing is said, people are going to latch on to that one wrong thing, because people are always going to focus on the negatives rather than the positives. Always.
Yes.
And that's positive psychology in a nutshell. That in order to grow and change your mindset, you need to focus on the positives rather than the negatives. And you and I have done extensive research on that.
Yes.
But I think about ways in which cancel culture takes place. And I think about, again, going back to the values and going back to when it gets to that point of canceling somebody. And I think about these young minds that are being molded or have grown up or are growing up in an era where gaming and gaming personalities are taking a forefront in so much of their life.
Right.
And I don't think that I would have ever thought that was going to be a possibility, or I wouldn't have fathomed that growing up. And I think of some of these professionals, like Shroud or Summit, who have been in the scene for so long, Dr. Disrespect, Tim the Tap Man, like all of these gamers that have been in the scene for a variety of different games that are now and have been at the forefront of this. That some of these kids, like, that's going to be who they know. Those are going to be the celebrities that they know and look up to. And so I look at some of the things, and I'm sure, off stream, these people, are obviously say different things, right? Like,
Of course.
I mean, that's protecting your image, right? Avoiding the being canceled. And to kind of, come down from this tangent, I think that, in my opinion, like, there are streamers that are doing a disservice to their following because they're not being their authentic selves. And maybe they don't want to be their authentic selves, because they're doing it to be monetized.
Yes.
And to be this person that they're not. And
money talks.
And not to bring this up or to put this individual in this category, but I think of Dr. Disrespect, because he plays a role he's not himself. Like, he is not Guy. That is his name.
Right.
He plays Dr. Disrespect on his streams. So he has this alter ego of sorts when he streams. And so it's interesting to see, you know, what we see on Twitch or on YouTube or whatever platform, but we obviously are not going to see, you know, what happens behind the scenes, and that's everybody. And so I think that's where cancel culture comes in, is because we are very quick to judge what we see in front of us and not what we see behind us.
100%. You know, to speak to a couple of things that you said, like the family friendly streams, like I don't know how much of that is always attainable, because you don't know who's coming into your stream. Usually if you're that big, especially,
Right.
thousands of people in there, it's likely you don't know even half of those people. Even if they've subscribed for 2 years, right? But I am a firm believer that language turns into can sometimes, I shouldn't say always, but language can sometimes turn into value systems and beliefs. So if I say over and over and over and over again, just to have simple language, if I say over and over and over again that homework is bad, don't do your homework. If I say that every stream, 5 or 6 times a stream, and there are children listening who have homework, I have to assume that there is potential for them to eventually, for themselves, decide, well, homework is bad. I mean, this person that I follow, that I have followed, or that I look up to, is saying that. So I'm going to believe it. Right? Like, the power of language is such a it's such a force.
Yep.
It's such a force, and that's why I think be your authentic self, right? Like I'm all for that, and I've mentioned that to you before. I've said that to other friends before. Like, be your authentic self, but if your authentic self is rooted in causing harm, that's something to look at. Right? Like, if your authentic self is saying, because you've been socialized to say it, that if you don't do this, you're the B word, or the C word, right? That I'm not going to repeat because I don't like using those words.
Yeah.
But if your authentic self is to say those things in response to something happening in the game or your frustrations from the day, like, in my opinion, that if that's part of your authentic self, that's something that you personally need to wrestle with, because that language, especially if you're somebody who has thousands of viewers, is not good. Those people are going to start repeating that. Right? So for me, like, should you be canceled for that? Like, I personally don't think you should be canceled for it, whether it's your true self or your persona. But you have to recognize the impact that you could potentially make by saying it, even if you only have 10 people watching.
Right.
And that's something that, as a streamer, that can get sort of fogged up, because you are potentially making money, and if it's making you money, I'm going to assume, if it's making you money, you're going to keep doing it because it's making you money. Money drives everything that we do in the world, unfortunately, sometimes. But yeah, I think that language piece is really important. And I've checked I think every single one of my friends, I've checked on their language at one point or another, streamers and not. And people have checked me on my language.
Right.
And I think about the other day, and I won't name names, but you had somebody that came into your chat that was saying, like, potentially, like, racial slur jokes, and they probably thought it was funny. You said, hey, we don't do that here. And deleted the comments, right? And when they said, what, is it bad, basically you said, yeah, it's not a good thing to do, and it's harmful. Like, it's not actually funny.
Right.
And I think that's how you address it, right? Now, if somebody had come in, if that same person came in and then you just let that slide, you let that language say, like you basically said that language is fine
Mm-hmm.
by not doing anything. I probably would have said to you, hey, like, that's probably not good, because
Yep.
even though you're saying nothing, you're perpetuating, you're
Mm-hmm.
creating an environment where that's okay. And it's not, right? So yeah, I think I think you're right, especially too about the persona piece, like Dr. Disrespect, like thing, his whole thing is like this, what was like an 80s like
Action star.
superstar,
Yeah.
action star. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's probably not who he is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he may have been born in the 80s, I don't know, but outside of that, he's a human
Yeah.
who has needs and wants, and has done things probably that aren't good.
Right.
Um, should he be given a chance to reconcile that and to make amends? Yes. Should he
Mm-hmm.
face consequences? Absolutely. Um, I don't know if it's been announced,
Nope.
but Twitch has not disclosed why they've banned him, at least as far as I've read. And
Mm-hmm.
will they ever? I don't know. Um, but if they do disclose and people find out why, there's going to be people on both sides of that argument,
Mm-hmm.
and it can get messy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but but if he comes out and says, "This is what happened. This is my way of responding to it. This is how I'm going to learn, or how I'm going to, um, not necessarily restore, but maybe transform myself,
Mm-hmm.
right, to be better. These are the steps that I'm taking, and here's how I'm going to make amends or have reparations."
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he'll be canceled.
Right.
And that goes for Alinity, and that goes for anybody, any streamer, you, or Reckless, or anybody. If they do something that's problematic, and then they lay out a whole timeline of, and do it in a genuine way, a whole timeline of, this is how I'm going to be better so that it doesn't happen again in the future, and I'm going to make reparations
Mm-hmm.
for what I said or did. It's hard to cancel somebody who's trying to be better,
Mm-hmm.
and who's acknowledging their faults and their flaws and their actions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I as we kind of as I kind of look to wrap up here, like for me, like I don't know, aside from maybe a few people, that I will ever cancel completely. Like I'll disapprove of some of their actions,
Yep.
but I think that cancel culture is so toxic because people are so quick to jump on one mistake that somebody made.
Yes.
And fail to look at some of the mistakes that they've probably made. And
100%.
I think about Dr. Disrespect, and hopefully stuff comes out soon about everything with him. But people are quick to judge, and people are quick to latch on to anything that they can get a hold of. And I think that is one of the biggest issues with cancel culture is people can change. Like we see it every day. Like I think for me that's the frustrating part, because somebody would be like, "Oh, this person's canceled." Especially during all of this, like go find their Facebook, this is their Twitter, this is their Snapchat. I think people are doing more harm by doing that, in my opinion. And because we're not giving a person an opportunity to grow. Like why not bring up like, hey, this is what you did wrong. Let them process and find a way to fix that. Granted, they're not always going to be able to do it by themselves. They might need somebody to help them, like, hey, this is what you could have done differently. And so when I think about cancel culture, and as I said, to kind of close out here, like it's hard for me to justify it existing at the end of the day. because I think that, and again, this might be romanticizing, but I think that there is opportunity for growth in every person. There's opportunity for people to learn from their mistakes. Doesn't mean they're always going to take it.
Yes.
But I think that there is opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. For the most part, I agree with that.
I don't know if you have any final thoughts before we.
Yeah. Final thoughts.
We could go on for much longer, I'm sure, but
these podcasts could be 3 hours long, I bet. But it's so fun to talk about. I mean, it's good to have these conversations. I think I'm grateful that you're willing to have them and that you're using a platform to talk about them. And I hope people are taking something away from it. Some final thoughts for me, I think, is allow yourself the luxury of changing your mind. I think that is like one of the most powerful lessons I learned in the last 5 years is just like, okay, you believe one thing, I believe one thing. Open yourself up to potentially changing your mind on that thing, just to see what the potential avenues could be, right? And when you do that, and I'll speak from my experience and only the experiences of the people that I know that have taken this stance, you open yourself up to the world in a way that will surprise you. Just say that. It will surprise you. So if you're somebody for example, if you're somebody who's like, no, people are set in their ways, they cannot change, open yourself up to potentially changing your mind on that. And like normalize that. Normalize changing your mind on things. It's okay to have one value for 25 years and then come upon new information and change your value. It is okay. Values are not set in stone. So I think that's the thing I want to leave viewers with is just allow yourself and normalize the potential to change your mind on something, whatever that thing may be.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. I think that's a good point to leave on. So, Robbie, I want to thank you once again for joining me on these conversations. I always love these conversations, and I'm always left with like stuff to think about afterward. So, thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate you. And, for everyone that stuck around for the entire video, please make sure to like, share, subscribe, comment down below your thoughts. I'd love to hear them and be able to have those conversations. We will have the next 2 weeks. We will have brand new guests to the show. I'm super excited to have them on. Hopefully, you're looking forward to those episodes as well as we continue this podcast and this journey. Once again, Robbie, thank you so much. I hope you all enjoy your weekend, and we will see you next Friday.